Welcome, children, to our final episode of our Halloween special. This episode is unofficially sponsored by Count Von Count from Sesame Street because nobody said that vampires were uneducated. One vampire, two vampire, three vampire, ah. Anyway, if you guys want to support us, you can do so at our Patreon at our patreon.com/Dragonus Podcastus. You can support us on our Fiverr pages, and I'm still working on the Spotify thing. But so to cap off our October fest, if you will, of spooky, scary, and skeletons, this is actually going to be Byron's episode because she's the expert on this particular subject. I will let her take over.
So, in honor of spooky season, we are going to take a trip back in time. The year is 1983, and the adventure module I-6 Ravenloft has just been released. Tracy and Laura Hickman wrote and released this adventure after playtesting it for several Halloween events. The original horror adventure for Dungeons & Dragons, this publication was a massive tonal shift from previous adventures that mostly featured classic fantasy. This adventure was created to give the vampire the spotlight as the big evil in the castle on the hill and explore themes of horror and gothic horror unlike any adventure had done previously. Of course, the vampire and villain is Count Strahd von Zarovich, an evil figure we all love to hate. Though Strahd's appearance has changed a bit throughout the years, he's always featured wearing classic gothic formal wear, a black cloak, and a red jewel at his collar. In the Forgotten Realms, Strahd is the first ever vampire. While most vampires are created through the exchange of blood, Strahd's journey is very unique. He made a deal with a dark power, who promised Strahd would never age or die if he killed his brother and drank his blood. Initially, Strahd recoiled at the idea, but eventually his jealousy and cruelty won out. He killed his brother on the night he was supposed to wed Tatiana and drank his blood, thus sealing the Dark Pact and giving him immortality as was promised. The original adventure featured just the castle, Ravenloft, and the village below, named Barovia. Eventually, Strahd's land was expanded to include an entire valley, a few towns, and other natural features in the region. This expanded realm is also known as Barovia. Unfortunately for most of its citizens, Barovia is sequestered from the material plane. This means that Barovian citizens are not able to travel outside the realm. Both Strahd and his subjects are prisoners in Barovia. Strahd von Zarovich has had an appearance of some kind or another since 1983. In 2nd edition, an entire multiverse was created and named after the vampire's ubiquitous castle. Ravenloft became a demi-plane of dread, featuring other dread lords and other types of horror across the spooky setting. Multiple other characters have been created to flesh it out, including famous monster hunter Rudolf van Richten. At the height of Ravenloft's popularity, Van Richten was the author of several manuals for different types of monsters. These books gave dungeon masters expanded bestiaries with which to torment their players. Since its inception, Strahd and Ravenloft have seen a surge in popularity. Curse of Strahd, the 5th edition version of this popular adventure, has continued to be one of the best-selling hardcover modules that Wizards of the Coast has published. In 2021, Wizards also published a new edition of Van Richten's Guide, this one being titled Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft. It features small entries on several of the most popular domains of dread, explanations on different types of horror, alongside new traps and a few new monsters. Strahd has also had appearances in other kinds of media. Strahd has been featured in video games, comics, novels, and even a Funko Pop figure has been made of him. I personally have run Curse of Strahd 3 times to completion, with plans to run it again in the future, and currently running a campaign that's ongoing. While this horror adventure is not for everyone, if you go into it knowing that you might see upsetting things, and establish some boundaries, prepare yourself, it is an amazing story for the players to live out.
Yeah, this is probably the villain to end all villains when it comes to
Mm,
D&D, and I personally think he's quite interesting. He gives off that whole that noble count vibe.
mm,
I've run
uh-huh.
I've run well, it was originally called Ravenloft, but I run Ravenloft. I run its sequel. What was the sequel called again? Sorry.
The sequel to I-6 Ravenloft was House on Griffin Hill, I believe.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Uh, it was. I liked both modules. But the recent one, Curse of Strahd, I am planning to get, and I hope that it's as good as everybody tells me because I've been wanting to run it and kind of read through it as well. Um, would you say that uh Strahd is he considered to be the the best villain to come out of D&D, or are there others?
Well, I think he's the most famous because he's been featured in, like I said, different adventures and different editions since 1983. He's one of the most famous D&D villains, for sure.
I agree. And also, I would, if you want a little more information, well, there is the book, but there is an episode of DM and all that covers the Ravenloft, like the module itself, not just like the history behind it. But probably my favorite thing is also, I believe, also Strahd. At some point, he can also turn into a bat or something, and that was just kind of synonymous with vampires. Um, that's probably my favorite bit about him. But it's also well, it was, I believe Castlevania came out after this module was published, but this is the villain that inspired, well, the Castlevania games. But correct me if I'm wrong, but he is heavily inspired. Well, were heavily inspired by Dracula specifically.
Mhm. Yeah, Strahd was definitely heavily inspired by Dracula, which is also partly why technically he has the title of Count. Although, I guess it depends on how you determine what a count is. How do you describe a count? But Strahd is more like a king because he lives in a castle, right? That's always nice. But he is the head of the state, right? He is the ruler of over the whole Valley of Barovia, the whole area. I mean, there's no one that he reports to, which is you're the highest, if you know the highest crowned head in the land. Wouldn't that make you the king? But they made him a count as a as kind of a throwback or an homage to Count Dracula. Yeah,
Yeah. And also, doesn't he sleep in a coffin too?
yeah, yep. In the crypts.
Yeah, I figured that. And also he has for me, when I think of creepy castles, I think, wow, Ravenloft. I think
Mm.
of that one castle from the live action Scooby Doo movie. Um
Yeah.
I also I think it's without Strahd, vampires would have never taken off. And well, until Twilight came along and kind of ruined that image, but we don't have to talk about that.
Well, I think that vampire popularity and Strahd's popularity kind of go hand in hand. But vampires started being more popular around the time that Dracula was first written in like Victorian England.
Yeah, yeah, I believe also, well, this is before the modern interpretation of the vampire, but vampires did have this weird thing. They had a hypnotic gaze or something.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah, yeah. In fifth edition, there's different. Strahd is like a vampire lord, and then you've got a regular vampire, and then you've also got vampire spawn. Vampire spawn are lesser vampires. They don't have the full powers, but Strahd, as a vampire lord, he does have a charming gaze. Yes, he can turn into a bat. He can also turn into mist, and thus basically escape any encounter, which makes him such a fun villain too. Because while the players may be thinking that they've got him on the ropes or they're about to kill him, and then he just turns into a cloud and disappears.
yeah, he doesn't exactly stand his ground, does he?
Well, if you were about to die, would you stay there or, poof out?
Poof out, I like that.
Yep.
um, yeah, and I'm also under the impression that his entire backstory is sort of inspired, but is quite inspired by Dracula because, Dracula was trying to search for a bride, and Strahd he was no, okay, so yeah, he was basically trying to find somebody, as well, but
Yeah.
yeah, it's kind of interesting, and also the various interpretations of vampires over the years have been very interesting as well. Like, for one thing, I think the closest we can get to Strahd outside of his module would probably be either something like Count Dracula from the Batman cartoon, which
Hmm.
that one is actually really cool because it's a literal creature of shadow going up against a man of shadow, and also because it does use the hypnotic gaze, but also it's also plays into the idea that vampires can also create other vampires via biting them. Correct me if I'm wrong on
Yep.
that.
Yeah, so Strahd officially has a couple of, they call them brides. He's got a couple of people that he's turned and keeps around the castle as vampire spawn, but also other lower level like minions that he keeps in the land to kind of do his bidding. And another aspect of the vampire is the sunlight sensitivity. In Barovia, the way I play it, Barovia is dim enough that they don't suffer from damage when they're in the sun. So Strahd can walk around during the day, and so can his minions because it's so cloudy.
That's really interesting, actually. So would you say that, like, would it be unfair for like a group of paladins to just walk in and just take them out, or would you have to like play around that idea?
Well, even I hear, yeah, I hear this idea sometimes. Building a character to play Curse of Strahd. Should I play a cleric or a paladin? And that's totally fine. If that's what you want to do. But Strahd is a vampire lord. In the story, he has access to every wizard spell ever. And he is an accomplished tactician and a war general. So, if played correctly, even a group of high-level paladins should have a problem defeating Strahd because it's his castle, you're on his turf, and again, he can turn into a bat, get away, he can turn into mist and get away. There are lots of tools in his toolbox.
He could also go abracadabra, I'm an umpire.
Why would he do that?
I don't know. Just I don't know. That was a joke I heard from Bugs Bunny, and it was so weird. I thought about that, and it's like, well,
Vampire umpire.
it's great. Actually, it's pretty funny. Um,
Uh-huh.
I also heard, like, doesn't he have like a servant in like the kitchen that is like weird, like eats undead or something?
Not in the 5th edition version of the module, but there are people in the castle who serve him. There is kind of like a caretaker. There's also his Chamberlain, I think his name is Rahadin. He's a dusk elf, so he's really, really old. And he serves as Strahd's like right hand and can help, uh take the players down a peg or two if they get uppity.
Yeah. I don't believe, like, would Strahd ever like try to like convert players or like.
Oh yeah. Well, with the charm effect and even just with regular like, his like regular charm, not like a special power, but like his charisma, you know, he can definitely try and get people onto his side. When I run Curse of Strahd, I play Strahd as very sympathetic and misunderstood because the players will have been going through the adventure and hearing about how terrible Strahd is, but then I like to run a scene where they meet Strahd, and Strahd says, "Oh, I'm sure you've heard terrible things about me, and unfortunately I'm just so misunderstood," and a lot of the players actually buy that. It's great.
That's crazy. What I like to do sometimes is, if whenever I run Curse of Strahd sometimes, is that Ravenloft technically, but
Mm.
what I like to do is I like to I play the sympathy card too, but then, one of my players actually like bought it but got close to Strahd and actually stabbed him through the heart.
Wow.
Yeah. Uh I was gonna
Oh,
I was, I was gonna make a joke, but I lost
well,
it.
Well, part of the module is as written. It says that Strahd believes that they are searching for a successor, but that no one will be worthy. So it's kind of like Strahd is thinking, oh, I'm sizing these people up. Maybe one of them could take my throne, but then, there's always some reason or another that Strahd rejects all of them. So it is possible, definitely, that Strahd is getting close to the players, seeing what they can do, sizing them up and all that stuff, but ultimately decides they're not worthy of his throne.
Yeah, I kind of figured that, and also because he's immortal, and he probably wouldn't want to give up his throne anyway.
Well, he is cursed. It's kind of in the title, right? Curse of Strahd, where he can't. He doesn't age, and he can't die, but he can't leave, and he doesn't have the woman that he's searching for. In the story, he fell in love with Tatiana, and unfortunately, she did not feel the same way because he was quite a bit older than her, and this is kind of what led to Strahd saying, I want to stop aging, right? And that's where the vampire pact comes in. Well, Strahd doesn't age, obviously, but anytime there is an incarnation of Tatiana, she dies. Strahd cannot get a hold of her. He cannot, marry her or be with her. It is part of the curse of the land, curse of him. He can't have the woman that he thinks he loves.
Yeah, that is kind of unfortunate, and also, well, it also plays into the idea of like greed and jealousy and all that.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of reminds me of Anakin's path to the dark side, if you will.
Yeah, a little bit.
It's weird because I would not be surprised if I mean if they ever make an official other sequel to Curse of Strahd, I would not be surprised if Tatiana revealed that she actually um, bore his kids. But again, circumstances are a bit weird. But it would be interesting. But also, isn't he in search of like some kind of weird artifact, if I remember correctly?
Well, in the 5th edition module, the players are looking for artifacts to help in their journey to kill Strahd. One of those artifacts is Strahd's old journal, which is written in a code, and it's supposed to be written in a way that puts Strahd in a very sympathetic light. So just kind of talking about all his plights and things like that. That is something that he's looking for, but ultimately he's looking for Tatiana.
Yeah, I figured that. Also, um, talking about Barovia, if I remember correctly from the Ravenloft module, there was something about there was like a fortune teller that predicted where certain items were in the Ravenloft castle, specifically in that module, which I find quite interesting. It's a lot of fun to just really screw with the players in that sense. Um, there's also the shopkeep in that for that specific module, and because he's the only shopkeep in the area, he like hikes up the prices on any
Yeah.
major items. It's like it's a lot of fun. I think overall, if you're looking for like a great horror adventure or you're looking to play something for Halloween, this is definitely the module for you. There are other horror themed things you can run theoretically, but this is probably the most popular.
hmm And there have been different kinds of supplements and additions from the community and third-party writers and publishers. And one of those is a publication called One Night Strahd, which is a guide on how to run either a shorter campaign, highlighting just the single or a handful of most important adventure locations in the module, or how to run kind of like a castle dungeon crawl and run players through Strahd's castle in 8 hours.
That's really cool, actually.
Mm-hmm.
I remember something. This also, I feel like Strahd is kind of also inspired a little bit by Alfred Hitchcock, but that could just be me. But there was a bit I saw from a show where a monster was like, "Hey, master, here's a guide on how to make a bicycle out of monster parts." And then he picks up another book and he says, "Here's a guide to make a monster out of bicycle parts." I
That's
don't
great.
I don't remember where that was from, but I really enjoyed that. That was a funny. that was a funny bit that I remember, and
Hmm.
I think the master you're referring to was a vampire. So that was actually my first ever exposure to vampires on in a general sense. Um,
Hmm.
so yeah, so also um so in terms of just and talking about vampire lords in particular before we wrap up, so correct me if I'm wrong, but vampire lords have the ability to they actually are immune to the turning effect of clerics and paladins, correct?
Yes.
So, and since Strahd is a vampire lord, that technically makes any kind of like turning effect against him pretty much useless. And as you said, he's pretty much got an encyclopedia full of spells, like
Hmm.
all the spells. It's like, how do you like how do you counter that? It's like, and now if you want to be particularly evil, you could just like power word kill, finger of death, power word kill, and just go from there. But that wouldn't be very fun, would it?
Right. So in the way that I run Curse of Strahd, there are certain things throughout the land that are partly giving Strahd his power, and the players need to go to those sites and do certain rituals to weaken him, lessen his connection to the land, because it's kind of a thing. Strahd is the land. I am the ancient. I am the land. This is kind of part of his persona. And so, by weakening those connections, the players are weakening him physically and removing some of the protections that he has. It kind of like lowers his armor class, and reduces, like if he's got like damage resistance and things like that. And then there's also inside the castle itself, at one of the tallest towers, there's a giant crystal heart, like an atomically correct crystal heart that feeds on the souls of people who've died in Barovia and gives Strahd temporary hit points. So if the players can destroy that, they can also weaken him. And by doing all of these things and hopefully a few good rolls and a few good hits, it is possible to defeat him.
Alcohol may be required for this instance, but we
A
do not condone this.
little
Uh,
liquid courage wouldn't help. It wouldn't hurt, yeah.
yeah, that too. Anyway, so yeah, so in conclusion, so for me personally, I love Strahd. I love Ravenloft. That's
Hmm.
what I was exposed to, but Curse of Strahd is also it's the more modern print of the module, but I think it's pretty fun. I'm really hoping that we get more from Strahd, or we get a more horror themed module in the future. And personally, I'm hoping that um at some point like they have like a short story where like Morning Kanan or Tasha like go to Barovia and like just talk to Strahd, not like try to like kill him or anything.
Well, Mornicate is actually already featured in the 5th edition module.
Oh
He's
really?
been to Barovia. So it's a quest that most people kind of cut out, but Mordenkainen is living in the Baratok Mountains. He has he's kind of lost his mind because he organized an assault on the castle and he was thoroughly defeated. He lost his spell book, so he retreated up to the mountains where he casts Mind Blank on himself every day, and he casts Mordenkainen's Magnificent Mansion, and he just lives in his madness. The players find him, and if the players find him in the mountains, he's just like an old man living in a magic mansion who can't remember his own name, and when he wakes at dawn, he casts these two spells and does nothing else all day. So it's kind of like a puzzle or a skill challenge for the players to try and help him remember who he is or cure him of his madness. And if they do, in my games at least, he becomes kind of a quest giver or lore giver to explain how some things in Barovia work. And then he goes off to find his spellbook.
Which I'm guessing that Strahd probably has.
It's not laid out exactly where it is, if it's in Barovia still, but Strahd has quite a few treasures in the castle, so it could be in there.
And also be wary, for greed is a fleeting thing, and it can get you killed very quickly.
Oh yes.
So yeah, any last thoughts and queries before we wrap up?
Well, if you're listening to this episode and you're interested in playing Curse with Strahd, reach out to me. I'm always putting new campaigns together, and like I said, I've run it several times, and I'd love to run it several more.
I agree, and also, well, and if also you're looking for more to spice things up as well, I am also looking to run a Curse of Strahd, or even just the Ravenloft module, because I have that, and I also have the original Richtofin's Guide to Monsters, which was really,
Hmm.
no, sorry, it's Richtofin's Guide to Ravenloft, but it's still, it's a lot of fun, and that's a fun book to read. But, so yeah, thank you guys so much for listening, and we will see you guys next week, and also, be safe and happy Halloween. And be wary of the full moon.
Always.
Always.